kind of gives away the jersey kind of gives away my take on this. This is a number 17 Josh Allen jersey. I'm Ryan Thomas, everybody. Thank you for joining me on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel. As I hop back on, there's a lot to talk about. I already kind of delved into why we should support the man that is on the back of this jersey, Josh Allen, the newest quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, why we should support him. I'm also here to combat a little bit of an article that I, stumbled upon. I think it was by Field Yates of ESPN. I like Field Yates. But, Field Yates was very high or very low on the Buffalo Bills offseason. And Mike Clay, actually, of ESPN, thinks that the Buffalo Bills had the worst offseason this year. And there were other ESPN writers or whatever that said the same thing, that the Buffalo Bills had a very bad offseason. I really think that is a really lazy, salty, disgruntled, whatever you want to call it, take on a team that, if they look at all the 31 other teams in the NFL, all of those teams, they look at those teams with a higher regard than they do Buffalo. And what I mean by that is Buffalo has always been a team that's never talked about on ESPN or NFL Network. They do more coverage, but not a lot. They're not a glitzy, glammy team that is talked about in public television conversation often. They say 32 teams, 24/7, 365 days a year, 24/7 on NFL Network. It's not always the case. And they talk about the Patriots, they talk about the Cowboys, they talk about the Packers, they talk about the Browns more than they talk about the Buffalo Bills. And when they do talk about the Buffalo Bills, more oftentimes than not, they don't have good things to say. Even when the Buffalo Bills are coming off a post-playoff season in which they defied expectations, they defied the odds with a first-year head coach, a less than mediocre starting quarterback, a one-dimensional offense because of that one-dimensional mediocre quarterback, and a defense that had a lot of new players on it with Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Trey White really leading the way for that secondary. The season that the Bills had last year was nothing short of remarkable. Nothing short of that. Maybe luck went their way a little bit. Maybe Stephen Hauschka nailed a few 50-yard field goals. But last time I checked, Adam Vinatieri notched a few field goals in some of those Super Bowls that New England won back in the day. So if we're going to play that game, we got to play that game with everybody. It's got to be fair with everybody. It's got to be the same game played with everybody, not just with certain teams that the NFL media does not like to cover. And they state that, well, they got worse at the quarterback position. How? How is that known that they got worse at the quarterback position, given the fact that Tyrod Taylor finished 30th, 31st, and 32nd the 3 years he was here as a quarterback in passing yardage per game, one of the worst quarterbacks in the National Football League. Last I checked, A.J. McCarron in 2018, Nate Peterman in 2018, and Josh Allen have not played it down yet. We're not in the season yet. So how could a writer say that the Bills got worse at the quarterback position before it has actually even taken place for these quarterbacks to prove that they are, in fact, better than Tyrod Taylor? A.J. McCarron, not much there. 4 career games, 1 start in the playoffs, so technically 5 career starts. And he did pretty damn well in that limited space. Played a really close playoff game, a playoff game that the Bengals probably should have won had it not been for that fumble late in the game. And You know how I know that? I watched that game today on NFL Network. I watched that game today on NFL Network only because of A.J. McCarron. I wanted to see what I liked, what I didn't like, and there was more I liked than what I didn't like. And I can tell you this, there was more I liked about A.J. McCarron as a passer, far more than what I liked about Tyrod Taylor as a passer. And there's so many people out there that are saying, look what Tyrod's going to do in Cleveland. What evidence do we have on that he's going to do any better in Cleveland than he did in Buffalo? We don't have any evidence of that because it literally hasn't happened yet. Based on an on-paper guessing game, people are playing that A.J. McCarron is worse than Tyrod, or that Tyrod will do really, really well in Cleveland. There's no way of knowing that because it hasn't happened yet. And not only that, last time I checked, football, baseball, basketball, hockey was not played on paper. This isn't fantasy football. This is NFL football that we're talking about. It's not fantasy basketball, not fantasy, you know what I mean? This is a real life X's and O's game that we're talking about. What do we have to say that these quarterbacks are worse than Tyrod Taylor? Nothing. And maybe Tyrod Taylor has some decent weapons around him with Jarvis Landry, with Josh Gordon, with Carlos Hyde. But he had some decent weapons around him here too. He had Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods, who Jared Goff turned into pretty decent receivers, especially Woods. He had Marquise Goodwin as well, who left Buffalo, did not get re-signed by Buffalo, and became the best wide receiver in San Francisco. Also had Charles Clay, who I thought did not get the ball enough. You also had LaShawn McCoy, who I think got the ball almost too much in that offense, making that offense highly, highly one-dimensional. And say the same thing about a lot of other quarterbacks, but, you know, being one-dimensional. But Tyrod literally, statistically, week in and week out, was one of the worst quarterbacks in the National Football League the last 3 years, and yet the national media has this dumbfounded, just stupid sensation with this guy that I just don't understand. And Cleveland, which I know that there's Cleveland Browns fans that listen to this podcast, Cleveland, I hate to break it to you, but you might have actually got worse at the quarterback position with Tyrod Taylor and Baker Mayfield. There's only so much that those guys can do, and there's a lot of things that those guys can't do. Despite the success that Baker Mayfield had in college, I don't know if it translates to the pros. Tyrod Taylor had very limited success as a starter, and please, for the love of God, do not say that Tyrod Taylor broke the Buffalo Bills playoff drought. If that was the case, he would have thrown for over 5,000 yards, over 50 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Come on, people. He threw for 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, literally while trying to throw the ball, threw for 67 yards in a game, threw for 57 yards in another. One of the worst game-by-game stretches in any season that I've ever seen a quarterback display. That is why he's not on the Buffalo Bills. You want to go to their defense. You want to go to the Buffalo Bills defense. Amongst the fans, amongst the chatter for the fans, what the fans talked about, the sole principle is that they needed to add a linebacker. They needed to add another pass rusher. They needed to add to their secondary. They needed depth. They needed a replacement for Kyle Williams. Do you see where I'm going with this? They checked every single box off that list. And then some. Drafting Tremaine Edmonds, being in the position to draft Tremaine Edmonds, and then going and getting him, making that deal happen, and then going out and drafting Harrison Phillips as the heir apparent to Kyle Williams, who was a mauler in college with over 100 tackles as a defensive tackle. Name me the last time you heard that. I'll give you, I don't know, $1. I've never heard of a defensive tackle in college having 100 tackles. Never. And I am a Die-hard football fan. I root for my own teams. I root for my own players, but I watch the game. Obviously, I pay attention to all of it. And I've never heard of that. Furthermore, the guy was a matchup nightmare on the most opportunistic moments in the biggest games. He showed up. Josh Rosen knows a lot about Harrison Phillips. Sam Darnold knows a lot about Harrison Phillips. Baker Mayfield probably knows about him too. So, of course, any quarterback makes a decent highlight reel, but it's about the drives. It's about drive for drive. Can they go tit for tat with the Tom Brady's? Can they go tit for tat with the Ben Roethlisbergers? Can they go tit for tat with even Andy Dalton? And many people in Cincinnati, writers, fans, believed that Dalton should have been benched for McCarron, that they wanted McCarron to start. So all this national media complaining about the Buffalo Bills, I think they actually got better in 2018, and I think they could make the playoffs once again. I'm Ryan Thomas. Take care, everybody.